Sometimes the brightest spotlight shakes the hardest just before history is born. Gary, Indiana, a late year night in the old Roosevelt Auditorium. My name is Jermaine Jackson, and that night, the night I still remember, every breath, every slight tremble of the spotlight, it began not with music, but with a chill down my spine, not fear, not worry, but an indescribable feeling as if I were standing right on the edge of something so big, something I had no words to describe at the time. All I knew was that night was not normal. The small Roosevelt Auditorium always smelled of old wood and the faint dampness of stairs that had never been repaired. The crowd crowded the pews, the laughter of children mingled with the squeak of shoes. The yellow lights hanging above the stage looked as if a strong wind could knock them down, and in that seemingly unremarkable space, I felt an invisible pressure pressing down on my chest. Michael stood right next to me. A 5-year-old child held a microphone larger than his hand. He said nothing. He just looked straight at the stage that was gradually lighting up, the light reflected in his eyes as big as 2 glass marbles. Perhaps to many people that look was just innocent curiosity. But to me, to Jackie, to Tito, those who had stood next to him in countless rehearsals, that look was a sign. Michael always had 2 kinds of eyes before performing. One, a focused, attentive look, knowing exactly what he was about to do. 2, the look of a storm about to form. And that night, his eyes were the second kind, quiet, not saying a word, but as if containing an entire universe rotating inside. I leaned down and whispered, "Ah, Mike." Okay. He didn't answer, just nodded. And that look, a look I would see 1,000 times later, made me swallow to keep my composure. I was the older brother. I had to be steady. I had to be calm to be his rock. But I confess, in that moment, I was the one shaking. Murmurs erupted from the audience as the MC called out the Jackson 5, and we took our places. The musicians were waiting. The heavy red velvet curtain began to flutter as if to inhale before opening. I stood right behind Michael, placing my hand on his shoulder in a silent brotherly promise, I'll always be here. But as soon as I felt his tiny breathing, I knew tonight was not going to be just another performance. There was something waiting ahead, something I couldn't see but could feel with every nerve. The curtain opened, light poured in like a white waterfall. Michael stepped out. His steps were small but decisive, head tilted up slightly, and in that moment, just seconds before the music started, I saw his hand grip the microphone a little tighter than usual. The little vein in his hand bulged so slightly that almost no one else could see it, but I saw it. I always saw it. And because I wasn't just on stage with him, I watched him practice every day. I saw every moment he tried, and I always knew when he was scared, when he was confident, when he was about to do something we couldn't foresee. That boy, at just 5 years old, had an instinct that made me both, proud and nervous to the point of breathlessness. When the first drum beat sounded, everything went into performance mode. I saw Jackie slide to the left and Tito jerking the beat to the accompaniment. We had done this cast too many times. Every step was familiar. Every head bob was ingrained in our bodies. But today, there was a tiny pause, a pause that perhaps only I could feel in the middle of the count. It was so short that no one but me noticed, but it was enough to make my heart stop. That was the moment I knew Michael was thinking something else or feeling something else or about to do something else. I glanced at him. Michael was still standing there in the right place, staring straight into the crowd, but there was one thing, he hadn't moved. Not having performed the opening act as usual, I felt a chill run down my spine, not because it was wrong, but because the brother standing too close to notice could clearly hear each of its small, shallow breaths, the kind of breath that only it had when it was trying to remember something. And I squeezed the bass in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard It felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. Anxiety, intuition, premonition, all mixed together, forming a suffocating mixture of tension. The moment only lasted a few seconds, but to me, it felt like a lifetime. And I really knew, tonight the spotlight was about to shake in a way no one expected. The first beat of the opening drum beat, I knew something was wrong. Somehow Jermaine, always sensed every vibration in Michael's body as if there was an invisible string between us. And that night, that string tightened, not because of the music, not because of the audience leaning forward like a wave, but because of Michael's sudden stillness. Michael stood there center stage, small in the white light. He had to turn, jerk to the left, a move he'd practiced 100 times, but he didn't move. No. Move. Move. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. Those few seconds stretched like a crack in the ice. Michael's face didn't change much, but being as close as I was to him, standing behind him in countless rehearsals, watching him grow, I saw clearly what the audience never saw. In his eyes, a flash of emptiness, a kind of emptiness that gave me goosebumps, the kind of emptiness of someone who'd just forgotten what to do. The stage was bright, but I felt dark. Not real darkness, but a feeling of suffocation that enveloped my entire body. I opened my mouth to call his name, but I couldn't. If I called, if I ran, it would be an admission of defeat. That would scare Michael even more. I had to stand still. I had to trust him, but my heart wouldn't listen. Tito glanced at me, his eyes showing confusion. Jackie paused mid-movement, then, tried to regain the rhythm. The band behind them was off by a half beat too, as if they had sensed the moment's subtle shift. The audience, who of course hadn't noticed yet, they saw a boy standing in the spotlight looking as if he were preparing for a calculated opening, but I saw something else entirely. I looked at Michael's right hand, the one holding the microphone. The little fingers were clenched so tightly that I could see the plastic edge imprinted on his palm, being the way his head tilted slightly, his eyes darting to a corner of the stage just for a split second, that is, was the clearest sign. He was searching for the memory of the move and couldn't find it. My chest tightened. I'd seen Michael nervous. I'd seen him nervous, but forgetting a song right on stage, that was something I'd never imagined. The 5-year-old boy was standing motionless under hundreds of eyes, alone, no support, no time, no try again. I swallowed, my throat feeling dry, as if I drunk a desert without a drop of water. My whole body was hot, but my head was cold as ice. I saw the slight movement of Michael's lips, not to sing, but as if he were whispering to himself. No one could hear, but I knew that kind of whisper, it was how he panicked when his mind was running wild like a jammed machine, when the memory of a movement turned into a gray blur that could not be touched. And in that moment, the brother who always seemed so strong, was afraid in a way I had never known. Not afraid of him doing something wrong, not afraid of him being scolded. It was the fear of being a 5-year-old trapped in a blinding spotlight with hundreds of people waiting for him to shine. It wasn't a mistake, it was a psychological battle. And Michael was fighting alone. I took a half step forward. My instinct was to rush out, but I stopped immediately. If I ran out, I ruined the show. If I ran out, I told Michael I didn't trust him. If I ran out, I would rob him of the moment he needed to overcome. I stood still, but every muscle was as taut as a bowstring. The music continued. The audience still clapped in time. Everything moved as if nothing had happened. It was just Michael and I, two minds connected by tension, living in a completely different moment, a moment no one but us noticed. Then Michael took a breath, softly, but deeper than usual. The breath was drowned out by the music, but to me it rang out as clearly as a gunshot signaling the start of a race. His shoulders relaxed a little, his grip on the microphone loosened, his chin lifted, a series of tiny signals that only I, who had been with him since he was a child, could read. He was about to decide. He was about to do something. He was about to take a risk. My feelings shifted, still tense, still nervous, but with a strange layer of nervousness, like standing in front of so, and explosion, and not knowing which way it would go. Like I stared at his every move, every breath, every millisecond. And when Michael's little legs gave out a little, I knew, the next moment would change everything. When Michael slumped just a little, enough for his shadow to change shape under the lights, it felt like the small Roosevelt Auditorium had suddenly been swallowed by an eerie silence. No one in the audience noticed, no one in the band noticed, but I, standing just a few feet away, could see the gossamer tremor in his shoulders. I knew he was about to do something, but I didn't know what. The truth was, I'd seen Michael act out of character in small home rehearsals, times when he'd forgotten a line and turned it around on instinct. But standing in the middle of a stage in front of hundreds of people under lights so bright they would make an adult lose his cool, and a 5-year-old, no, that was beyond anything I thought he could do. But Michael wasn't a normal kid, and that moment proved it in a way no one expected. He took a slow breath. I saw his small chest rise and fall, a deliberate movement, a decision, as if in a split second he had accepted that he couldn't remember the dance. He couldn't take back what he'd practiced. He couldn't turn back. He couldn't stop time. And then he chose the only option left, improvise. But how he did it, to this day, I still can't understand it rationally. It all started with a tilt of the shoulder, a movement so slight, so strange, it almost didn't belong to any choreo style we'd ever learned. The lights reflected off that smooth curve, making it look like water tilting to its own mysterious gravity. I froze. The band behind him paused for a half beat. If you paid attention, Jackie glanced at him as if she'd just seen a new path open up on stage. Michael didn't look at anyone, didn't look at us, didn't look at the audience. He was so lost in his own orbit, as if the world around him had disappeared. Then he slid to the right, a small slide, incredibly delicate, especially for a child, not too fast, not too hard, but completely out of any routine. I heard the soft hiss of his shoes on the wooden floor. It was as thin as a knife blade across a mirror. No one understood what he was doing. No one except me saw him channeling his panic into a smooth movement, as if his emotions were finding their way out through his body. Then came the bounce. It wasn't a full spin, just a bounce, but it had a bounce, as if it had found the key to unlock the melody its body had composed in a moment of desperation. The audience began to applaud, sporadically at first, then more vigorously, as if they thought it was a unique, prearranged opening. And I stood still. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear each beat like the drums of Franz Soft's and before said softly, almost unconsciously, that move, that wasn't in rehearsal. I remember every word, every breath that came out of my mouth. It wasn't an exclamation. It wasn't pure surprise. It was a mixture of fear and amazement, a feeling of standing on the edge between accident and miracle and not knowing which way it would go. Michael continued. He didn't stop. He didn't turn to look for us. No sign of the panic that had gripped him just seconds before. His body drifted, glided, broken a bit, then reconnected on its own accord. Movements that had never existed before were now appearing before my eyes. A 5-year-old boy creating on stage, and the scariest part, he had no idea what he was creating. I saw his hands open in time, his wrist turning slightly in the direction of the light, an unconscious movement, but so beautiful it took my breath away. The audience rose to their feet. Each cheer echoed through the air like an endless wave. I stood there and understood. I was witnessing a moment that I would years later, recount in countless interviews, family stories, and my own memories. His improvised move became history, no exaggeration. Not the emotional key, the truth, a desperate decision, a moment of repression, a slip into the terrible void of childhood memory, which became the first seed of the daring, inventive, and theatrical instinct that the world would later know about Michael. And when he finished that, when at sequence of movements turned to look at the audience with sparkling eyes that could not hide a little confusion, I knew he had no idea what he had done. He had no idea that his slip had just shaken the room. He had no idea that the seemingly shattering moment had touched something that would become history. And I, Jermaine, stood there frozen as stone, because I knew, I had witnessed with my own eyes the birth of a fire that had started from a moment that should have been a mistake, a moment never to be forgotten. And no, I retreated backstage as soon as the music ended, my heart still pounding as if I hadn't yet recovered from the storm that had just swept through. The atmosphere backstage was unlike any other night of the show. It was thick, filled with broken noises, gasps, wide eyes, as if everyone had just witnessed something. No one dared to believe it was real, but before I could even process what had happened, the first sound hit me, a murmur, small, sporadic, but sharp. The sounds were hidden in the rain of applause from the stage before the backstage door closed. From the corner of the stage, a few technicians looked at me with a mixture of confusion, surprise, and suspicion. Not negative suspicion, the kind that we were hiding something from them. One whispered to the other, loud enough for me to hear, "When did he practice that move?" The other shook his head. "I've never seen him do that before." Did they hold it until the last minute? Hold it until the last minute? If they knew Michael had forgotten all the dance moves, they wouldn't have said that, but they didn't know. Only I did. Me in that moment of silence as Michael stood motionless in the spotlight. Michael ran backstage, his breath still ragged, his eyes brighter than the spotlight. Not because he was confident, not because he knew what he had just done, but because he had just come from a land he didn't understand. He looked at me, his eyes asking, "Are you okay?" But he didn't say it out loud. I bent down, put both hands on his shoulders and squeezed gently, partly to reassure him, partly to reassure myself. "You did what no one thought you could do." I spoke slowly, deliberately, but I didn't tell him how scared I was. He just pursed his lips, not understanding. He was too young to realize the specialness of what had just happened. Then the whisper started to get louder. It was as if a small storm was forming from the corners of the backstage. Each whisper was like a needle prick scattering into the air. That move was really new. It looked as soft as water, never seen before. A 5-year-old performing like that? Or is it natural? And then what I feared most happened. Someone whispered in an agitated voice, "I swear that didn't look like a mistake. It looked planned." I stopped. My heart skipped a beat. That was the plot twist I wasn't prepared for. Those who practiced, who sweated for the performance, all knew the moment was created by accident, by forgetting, by a small panic of a child standing in the spotlight. But the audience didn't see that. They only saw a perfectly beautiful move, and behind the scenes, rumors were starting to spin. I heard someone say, "Did the Jacksons hide a new song to create a surprise?" That move, if it was an improvisation, it would be rare. I thought it was a glitch, but it turned out good. It turned out good. Those two words pierced my head like a dull blade, leaving a tingling feeling. Michael accidentally created what people thought was a miracle, a slide smoother than the wind, a tilt of the shoulder that seemed to have its own trajectory, a movement that started from misdirection turned into a highlight. And now backstage, it was turning into another story, a story that I knew in a few hours would spread like smoke. Jackson 5 kid makes surprise hit tonight. New move is spectacular. No one knew the truth beneath the light. I sat down in my chair. My hands were shaking slightly, not because I was afraid Michael would fail, not because I was worried someone would blame him, but because I had just seen two paths open before me, so clear it made me shudder. One, if Michael did it again, it would become the first mark. Two, if he didn't, this moment would become a legend through word of mouth. Both were terrifying. Both were much older than Michael. And the harshest truth was Michael had no idea he had just stepped into the middle of those two paths. I looked over at him. He was fiddling with the microphone, his feet swinging as if nothing had happened. He had absolutely no idea the whirlpool of rumors that Noah's Ark that had formed because of him. But I did. I could see the looks everyone was giving him, no longer the surprised ones, but the looks of someone who had just accidentally revealed a big secret. A member of the crew came over to me, put his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Jermaine, you know, what your brother did out there, like people will be talking about this." I just nodded, say nothing, because I knew it wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a mere observation. It was a prophecy I was witnessing every second of every minute, the birth of a rumor, the birth of a story, the birth of a legend, and everything then starting from the moment Michael forgot a dance. As the last door of the auditorium closed behind us, I heard a dry click, like the end of a chapter in a story we hadn't even realized we'd written. The atmosphere outside was different from the bustle in the auditorium. A cold wind blew through the empty parking lot, making the street lights sway slightly, like old souls whispering in the wind. Michael stepped closer to me, gently holding my hand, not because he was afraid of the dark, but because he was waiting for an answer to something he hadn't dared to ask. I knew that look. The look of a child who had just fallen into the eye of a storm but didn't know if it had passed or was about to return. We walked a few steps in silence, only the sound of our shoes lightly hitting the rough cement floor. Each step seemed to stir some strange echo in me, a feeling I still didn't know what to call it. Michael looked up at me. "Did I do something wrong, Jermaine?" And his voice was so soft that if the wind had been a little stronger, I might not have heard it. I stopped, knelt down, placed my hands on his shoulders. "Mike," I spoke very slowly, as if to imprint each word into his memory, "what you did today, and none of us expected. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't normal either." He blinked, not understanding, but I knew he sensed the seriousness in my voice. We continued walking, and the sounds from earlier began to play in my head. The cheers of the audience, the backstage chatter, the surprised murmurs of the onlookers. It all seemed to blend into a strange, unfinished music, like a sound recorded on an old tape. And the audience thought it was intentional. Backstage thought we now do make a when. And those closest to Michael, we, the family, knew the truth lay somewhere between oblivion and instinct. Part of me still couldn't believe it. Michael forgetting a song, a situation that should have led to panic, created a moment that made everyone jump to their feet. I remembered someone's words after the show, the sound still echoing in my head. "People will be talking about this." I had heard them as a warning, but now, on the empty street with just Michael and me, I realized it was also a prophecy. We got back to the car. Michael climbed into the back seat, swinging his legs, still holding the small microphone he carried like a toy. The streetlights shone through the windows, casting thin yellow streaks on his face. In that moment, I saw he wasn't the child artist who had just made the room explode. He was just a boy, tired after a long day. He sat in the front seat, but didn't start the engine right away. I looked silently through the rear view mirror. Michael sat there, his head back in the seat, his eyes staring out the window as if the world outside was too big for him to comprehend overnight. His hands were still moving slightly, as if he were tracing in the air each movement that had happened, movements that he didn't know had become special. I took a deep breath. A thought crept into my head, so strong that it made me sit still for a few seconds. Has history just happened right before my eyes? A 5-year-old who forgot his lesson, a desperate improvisation, a movement no one had taught him, an instinctive reaction that produced an unprecedented cheer. No, this was no ordinary moment, and I knew it. As I drove home, I watched the small auditorium recede into the background, but the feeling of it intensified in me, not just because the show had been a success, but because of the creepy feeling I carried with me all night. What I witnessed was not a moment of creative inspiration. It was not a random accident. It was not an unconscious risk. It was like a door had just opened, a door that led to what many people later called natural talent and stage instinct, unique mark. I saw clearly something that Michael had not seen. That moment would follow him for the rest of his life. And later, when people look back on Michael's career, when they mention the strange movements, the jumps that seemed from another world, they will not know that the first seed came from a night when the Jackson 5 boy forgot his notes. When the car arrived home, Michael had fallen asleep. I looked at him, his soft face, his even breathing. No one would have guessed that just a few hours earlier he had just done something that had made hundreds of Volve people get up from their seats. I touched his hand lightly, and as if to engrave this feeling into my mind, the moment I was the only one who knew the truth. Legends don't start with perfection. Legends start with a moment of misstep and a twist that changes everything. I whispered softly, even though I knew he was asleep. Mike, and you've just created something you don't understand, but the world will. I believed it, not a vague belief. It was a feeling that ran down my spine, a feeling that never failed me. Tonight, history didn't knock. He whispered, and I, Jermaine Jackson, heard it all.